Hello and thank you for tuning my way. I'm here at the Goodman owned pet food plant in Edgeworthstown in County Longford. And before I begin, I would just ask you please, as always, to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I need 1,000 subscribers so that I'll be able to go out live on YouTube, on the YouTube platform, and get out to a wider audience. Now, you might ask, why is there a protest at a pet food plant? Why are farmers protesting here? Well, before I answer that question, I'd just like to give you a little bit of history. This pet food factory was opened 50 years ago in 1969 by the late Albert Reynolds. And for 5 decades it was a huge employer here throughout the 70s, 80s and 90s. This factory employed local people from the villages of Keena, Kellow, Legan, and it meant that they didn't have to take the emigrant ship. And I have spoken to many people who worked here in the factory for Albert Reynolds, and they speak lovingly about him. He was a wonderful employer. The work conditions were very good. It was a very well-paying job, and they speak very affectionately about him. He was a man that wasn't afraid to come in on the factory floor and roll up his sleeves and work with his employees. Then in 2006, a major fire devastated the factory. 2 years later, in 2008, Larry Goodman bought up 50% of the company. In 2011, his share of the company increased by 35%. And finally, this year, the remaining 15% was bought by Larry Goodman and Philip Reynolds, who had run the factory since the days of his father, bowed out. And it was with great sadness actually that the local people felt that the Reynoldses had finally relinquished all their control of this factory. So it's now 100% owned by Larry Goodman. And why are farmers protesting here? Well, there is what's called the fifth quarter. It is that part of the animal which the farmer doesn't get paid for. When a farmer brings his animal to the factory, typically it's around, we'll say, 700 kilos. That animal will kill out at about 350 kilos dead weight, and it's on that 350 kilos of meat that the farmer is paid. But the part of the animal that the farmer doesn't get paid for is things like the offal, the tongue, the hide, and every single part of the animal has a use, and it's very valuable. It's estimated to be to the value of about 20% of the animal. In fact, Seamus May, who is the chairperson of the International Small Business Alliance, has done the only study that I'm aware of on the value of the fifth quarter. Now, Seamus has travelled and lectured widely throughout Europe, America and Ireland, speaking about the monopolies that exist in Ireland, including the monopoly in the beef industry. And he is the only person to date that I'm aware of that has carried out any kind of a detailed study on the value of the fifth quarter. So the reason why the farmers are here protesting at this Goodman-owned plant is because they know that the raw material for the pet food comes from the meat factories, and it's a very valuable raw material, and the farmer is not getting paid for. Now, the situation here is that there was a little bit of a standoff here earlier today. The guards were called. A lorry attempted to leave the factory, and that actually didn't happen. The guards arrived, and it was some kind of deal was brokered that the lorry would remain where it is. And if you look in the background, you'll actually see the lorry halfway out the gate of the factory. I talked to a number of the farmers before I went live, and they are reluctant to speak on camera. 2 men here have been served with an injunction as a result of what happened here today. So there is fear of farmers kind of speaking to camera for fear that there will be consequences for them. So effectively now, the beef industry across Ireland is on lockdown. And Minister Coveney today spoke about the situation, and he's rather annoyed by the fact that in the olden days he was able to bring in 3 farm leaders and broker a deal with them, but it's not happening this time. In actual fact, the farm leaders have largely become impotent in this whole dispute, because the farmers on the ground, and I have travelled now to a number of meat plants around the country, and the farmers on the ground feel that the mainstream farm organisations don't represent them. They no longer represent them. They did, after all, go in and broker a deal with the meat plants in the first week in August, and this is a deal that farmers on the ground were not happy with, and that is why the situation has arisen that the farmers are now back protesting. Minister Creed attempted to broker talks, and they were to be held yesterday. But those talks fell through when the representatives of the meat industry pulled out. So it's anybody's guess now what is going to happen. I'm told that there's a huge push within the government to get this whole issue resolved before next week. The ploughing championships are taking place next week. It's the annual fun day for government ministers and for the Taoiseach, and it's all very jovial and it's great for PR. So it's not going to look very good for the government if there is a protest of beef farmers outside the ploughing. So that then is basically an update on what is happening here at the Goodman owned pet food factory here in Edgeworthstown. And by the way, it's Tuesday the 10th of September. Thank you very much for watching, and please will you share the video, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Deirdre for coming out in the spills of rain to do the cameras for me. You can play your role in all of this in getting the farmer's voice heard by sharing and getting it out to a wider audience. Thanks very much.